So, my name's Richard. I was born in Middlesbrough. You probably tell by the little bit of a northeast accent that I've still got. Although I'm told in Manchester that I sound really, really from the northeast. But it only ever seems to be when I order a latte or a Coke that it ever comes back out, right? But when I go back up to the northeast now and speak to friends, they're all like, "What's happened to you? Like, what's happened to your accent?" I grew up in a part of Middlesbrough called Acklam, which is one of the very few bits that isn't deprived by poverty standards. But my school that I went to, both primary school and secondary school catchment areas, were pretty diverse. Attainment levels were pretty low. I was the first person in my family to go to university, which I think for my generation was pretty rare. I think that a lot of the people that I went to university with and met along the way were always meant to go to university, and people from my background didn't really do that. So it was always an interesting journey that took me there. My parents were probably the least political people with a capital P you could imagine. My dad occasionally gets angry with the television, but that's about it. That's the extent of his politics. And my mum, they both met each other working for the local council actually. So they used to drive the buses for disabled kids around Middlesbrough and the North Yorkshire area. So I think that it was a sense of like public duty, I guess, that first educated me about what politics is. But I never had that overt discussion with my parents about politics and getting involved in politics, that sort of thing. So growing up was an interesting one. I mean, I was a teenager in Middlesbrough and a lad with plenty of time on your hands, and you meet lots of people and have a lot of fun. And I'd probably be described as like a youth that's hanging around a street corner under a lamppost or something nowadays. But it was a happy time, and I think that's why I still have like an element of a romantic memory of growing up in Middlesbrough. I think it's always one of those things where if anyone else was to knock the place, I'd get a little bit upset and defensive. But I also understand that it has its limits, and I had to, get out of there and do something. So I went up to university at Northumbria over in Newcastle to start with, and introduced to a big city and the benefits of the big city and meeting people from all over the world, which is strange when you come from a very predominantly white part of the UK, and you learn new things and you work hard, and I studied politics, which is a strange thing to do. My dad always said, like, what are you doing that for? You need to do something useful, like get yourself a trade, and etc. etc. I think he's softened on that at the minute, but he's still furious that I can't really do DIY. So I loved university. I think it's probably the bit where I really got something that I was interested in, that it was mine. It wasn't my parents, didn't dictate what I should do and how I should progress in my career. So meeting people from across the world and academics and being involved in that discussion really helped me. I think I really early on identified that the university system is about being on a journey. It's not necessarily the grades that you get, it's the soft skills that you get when you come out the other end. So I really enjoyed it. And then I, after working in education for a little bit, I went back to my old sixth form that I attended, and I taught politics, philosophy and economics for a little bit, and then headed over. I worked for a couple of MPs afterwards, and then headed over to Manchester, and that's when I was first introduced to Manchester about 6 years ago. So. So I live in Disbury in Manchester, and my favourite part of Bury South is Prestwich. It's Prestwich because there's a massive connection between where I live and Prestwich. It's a bizarre situation where a lot of people end up moving. So I have a lot of friends that now that live in Prestwich. Well, one of the benefits of it is although it does require regeneration, and it's a big local issue, that the success of independent businesses and independent restaurants is something to behold. And I think that a lot of out of city towns across Greater Manchester has a lot to learn. So I do have a close affiliation with Prestwich. I've always visited the area. I've always been in the area. It's the regeneration that's happened, especially in Prestwich, and there is still more to do. Draws you there. It's Prestwich in particular is just one very few success story of investment in Greater Manchester. But the issues that the area faces and the reason why I think it's really important to have what is the only pro-European choice at this election is because the investment that Greater Manchester gets at the minute is so centred around the economic capital of the city centre and Salford Media City that it's almost forgotten those outside areas, those towns and parts of Bury that don't get the investment that you'd expect, especially when the workforce contribute millions to the economy of the conurbation. So that's the biggest issue actually, because I think if we look at trust in politics, which is, the political system at the minute and politics in general is it's puerile in the way that people talk to each other and debate now, and even on a local level, people have just stopped engaging, and I think that's awful. And I think one of the main issues that have caused all this is just a lack of understanding and commitment to investment that works for everyone. That it's not just a city centre or beautiful office blocks and unaffordable housing, etc., and spatial frameworks that deserve all the investment. It's the communities already exist. And the only real way to achieve that is to just get rid of this nightmare that's existed for the last 3 years. So the reason that I'm standing is not just to champion some of the investment issues, and I understand that the area is deprived. Attainment levels have got worse over the last 3 years, and I know those issues very well. But it's also to give the people of Bury South the opportunity to vote for a party that wants to put right some of the investment issues that have blighted the area. And the only way to do that is to stop Brexit and make sure that we reinvest the money back into the areas that have been forgotten. And even that's just a start. Will we ever really build the trust back again between politicians and people? I don't know, but I'd rather be part of trying and failing rather than shouting from the sidelines. Success would be a Bury South that has re-engaged with the political system and the person that represents them, and they feel, I'd love that relationship with the electorate where they go, oh, yeah, politicians are a nightmare, aren't they? But ours is all right. I like ours. That would be success. And I know that's a really broad answer to it because it's not the specific policy wins that you'd want along the way, but helping people, making sure that they have that voice in Parliament, making sure that if someone has a serious asylum issue, or if they find themselves out on the street, or if they've been affected by a particular piece of legislation and they have no one else to turn to, they decide to go on the website and find their local MP's email address and just see what will happen. If I can change enough people's lives in the process of being in Parliament, then that would be success. Failure would be people to look back at my political career and say, he wasn't there, he didn't work for us, when I needed him, he wasn't there. And again, I know that's a very broad answer to what would be failure, but that is what every politician should be. That should be their KPIs, right? Doesn't matter what the party says. Doesn't really matter about what national legislation you want to see implemented. What should matter is that you've delivered the best of your abilities the representation that the area needs. I'd say that the reason that this country finds itself in its political position is because it has consistently polarised its political view. I think that both parties have now got to this extreme where they simplify arguments. Fact no longer gets in the way of opinion, and we don't really know what to believe. And this breakdown of the debate and an understanding of human beings, because politicians are human beings. This tribalism started years and years and years ago, and I think that if this country is to genuinely change its mindset and how it operates, it needs to allow this centre ground, pragmatic movement to achieve as much political representation as possible. I think that I can understand why at election time, especially this one, why people feel that they need to go back to a comfort zone. But if we think that we're going to get anything different by voting for the same two parties that we have done for the last 100 years, then I think that we're probably selling ourselves short a little bit. Tactical voting and this whole new phenomenon of how parties should stand down for other parties is such a sellout of democracy. I mean, how broken is our democracy that we have to try and suggest that parties need to stand down for other parties? That somehow, if you're not red or blue, then what's the point? Because Parliament will be a much worse place for it if we think that debate is polarised now. Imagine what it would be like if 100% of Parliament was either red or blue. If you don't fit into the right pigeonhole, then you shouldn't have political representation. But democracy isn't just about deciding who the government is. It's about participation. It's about giving people a voice. It's about giving minorities a voice. It's about renewing that relationship with people on a regular basis and getting a snapshot of people's opinion. So if you're not interested in the tribal politics of the Labour Party or the Conservative Party, and you believe in genuinely improving political discourse and the issues that we stand for, and I don't want to rattle off our manifesto because it's not what this is about, then give us your vote. Because unless we can go to the country and say, look, we've got X million votes, this is who the people who we represent, regardless of our numbers in Parliament, then we can make a serious claim to and a pitch to the people that we represent. And I think that we're not going to change how we elect our politicians overnight, and we're not going to be proportional, but having a large national vote share is really important in doing that. So first off, 2008? This first started? I mean, big picture stuff, education has been an ideological political football for political parties for 50 years. And, shock horror, the only people that actually pay the price for that are the kids growing up in the areas that don't have the provision that they need. 7 miles, some people travel in Radcliffe to go to school. 7 miles? I don't know about you, but it was, it's hard enough to get, when I was growing up, it was hard enough to get some kids who lived around the corner from a school to get there. And the impact that has on a community, you can't put a pound sign against that because attainment levels are down. university enrolment in that area is down. So the choices and aspirations that those kids have been decided for them by what is this bizarre bureaucracy behind the scenes of refusing to really address the issue. Now, we've had a Labour government, a coalition government, to be honest, and now a Conservative government that have failed every single time. I mean, the East Lancs site was a perfect solution to the issue back in 2008, which fell through. And you got housing instead, and we won't even get into the housing issue. You now have a trust, a free school trust, that has put together a really good plan. And again, say what you like about free schools. Let's be pragmatic.
What is a free school?
So a free school is, every school now has to be a free school. It's a piece of legislation that's passed under the Conservative government. And it means that it's not under direct local authority control, basically. It needs to be sponsored. And you know what? I can sympathise with the argument that people don't like the idea of not having control over a school, its budget, etc. But at the same time, this provision is so desperately needed, and there are a lot of examples of where free schools are delivering the provision extremely well as well. They're doing really well in some examples. And I think that the requirement and the need and the desire is there within the community. And it's really important that the community is with this application process, because if the governance structure is strong with a free school, if the parents are involved, if the local businesses, local charities are involved, then the trust and the governance process with the trust will be successful. In terms of what's stopping it, well, I mean, ideology stops things. I think the council need to pull their finger out and actually accept that this is the only way to deliver the provision that is desperately needed. I think in the past, it's been clear that it's been an election issue, and sometimes if you make it an election issue, then it prevents action. In terms of where it's up to, I believe that the bid is going to be decided in 2020, early next year. But this community has been here before, so we need to make sure that it doesn't end up being another 10 years before it gets the school that it desperately needs. But just to come back to the big picture stuff, social mobility is so important in these towns, just across Greater Manchester, specifically in Bury. And if we don't address the provision of schooling across the area, then we will allow people to be sold short by the government, by the state, and by politicians. And again, coming back to this trust issue, how can people trust politicians when since 2008 they've been promised a school year after year, and still in 2019 it's still an election issue? It's bonkers. So for example, in this example, it's Star Academies Trust, which is a number of schools. It's for profit.
Basically, so in its base primal drive, it's set up to allow entrepreneurs to get involved. It's a form of privatisation in a way.
It is. So it is complicated. So the building that they have will be paid for usually by the trust, but the land will be leased to them. So the DFE will have control of the land. We could get into like a really in-depth argument of the workings of DFE and how the land works with it. But there will be an element of control there from the DFE. And there's obviously the curriculum that has to be met. So this isn't like, we're not paying the private sector to dictate what they get taught. But, I mean, there is no direct link of accountability between the local authority and a free school, which some people have an issue with. And I think this is why it's become such an ideological issue. When, yeah, I actually do sympathise with that argument, but in these examples where provision is desperately needed, something needs to be delivered. Well, I mean, I think Parliament has proven itself useless in the last 3 years. I think, you know, I didn't mean to start a theme of trust, but one of the reasons why trust is at an all-time low, not just with political participation or the view of politicians in general, is because people don't really see what they get back. I think that in terms of experience that I could bring to the table, look, I'm a Liberal Democrat. I didn't choose politics as a career choice. You have to work bloody hard to be elected as a Liberal Democrat at any level. It's about delivering on the promise of that community engagement, community network, and you know, remembering that when you are there, and I've worked there, when you're there and the bubble effect starts, that you need to break out of that bubble as quickly as possible. So, you know, as I said, I've worked with politicians, and a lot of them, and I can see the mistakes that they make, because you know, you get a nice flat in London and you are, you know, self-important and people want to talk to you, and even just having the staff support, everything, it has a massive impact on your ability and your understanding of why you're there in the first place. And you know, when you come from a background that I come from, I don't think that for 1 second I have ever felt, you know, aggrandized by any position that I've ever been elected to. I think that actually, for me, it's this weight of responsibility that you have to represent the people that put you there, and we have lost that. And I think that if we are seriously arguing that politicians currently in Westminster have the experience to govern us, I don't think you've really been watching what's happened over the last 3 years. I think, if anything, that democracy in this country and representative democracy in this country is in serious crisis. I think that I'm a liberal, right? So actually, although in principle I sort of understand meritocracy and the merits, ironically, of meritocracy, working hard is different for every individual. You aren't born equal. You don't start on a level playing field. So, you know, to suggest to someone that they've worked harder than someone else is simplifying the argument, if I'm honest. Look, you know, and it comes back to where I come from. Like, you can see people work really, really hard, and they're single mums working every day because they can't afford childcare, and you know, they try and work where they can, but it doesn't really make much sense for them to work every hour because they lose it. So, you know, but they're happy, and you know, they've reached their want in life has always been to do that. They've always wanted to have kids. That's what they've always aspired to do. So who the hell are we to say that that's the wrong life choice? And liberals believe in individual value. You know, we want to ensure that everyone reaches not what they would do if they worked hard, but reach their potential. And potential and aspiration is different to meritocracy, because meritocracy says you either work hard and achieve this, or it's the high road, see you later. That for me is, you know, I think people can spin meritocracy and making it sound like, you know, it's about the doers and the don't and the people who sit at home doing nothing. But, you know, the fact that you know, my parents worked with disabled kids, right? Some of those kids ended up working full time with Down syndrome in drama groups, and you know, that is an incredible achievement, and they've worked hard to do it. and they might not qualify under someone else's definition of meritocracy. That they're not going to earn £3,000 a week playing for Man City, or £14,000 a week playing for Middlesbrough, but they've achieved an immense amount, and it's about their aspirations and what we do to ensure that they get there. So the reason I got involved in politics and social mobility and this exact topic, and if we can provide, and this is a little bit, utopia, pie in the sky stuff, so bear with me. If we can provide a means to ensure that every kid, no matter where they're born, can achieve their potential, and their potential will be different to the kid that's born next to them in the ward. If they can achieve that potential, then I think that's the point of a government and the point of a state. So I don't know if that answers your question, but people are using meritocracy to tribalize politics. It needs to be polarized all the time. You're either blue and you believe in doers, or you're red and you believe in the people who would rather stay home and do nothing. And that's just, the quality of debate, to be honest, is shocking if you do that. But you do miss the point. The point isn't about rewarding one group and disciplining the other, or what's happened with not just the benefit system, but there is, you speak to people who are, and when I first joined the party, I joined the Liberal Democrats because there was a housing association in the centre of the town that I was born in, who, after a very long drawn-out process, basically they'd started demolishing houses and then ran out of money because financial crash happened, and there was still some really substandard housing that would not meet the 2005 Housing Act requirement whatsoever. And they were sold off for £1 each, hundreds of them. And a housing association bought them, which will remain unnamed. And they housed immigrants, asylum seekers, and also local people, all in this area. And honestly, Lee, the standards were awful. Like, there were the holes in the roof. It was horrendous. And I wrote to Labour MPs, Labour councillors, because the Labour Party weigh the vote in Middlesbrough, and I'm not making a political point here. This is all fact. I didn't get a response at all. I think I got a response off a councillor that was just basically like, "Oh well, this is this is a long-term plan of regeneration, etc., etc." I was like, oh, it's a bit of a crap answer, actually. So being at this point slightly weird, because I was starting to become politically active, and don't let anyone tell you that politically active people aren't weird, because we are. I thought, I'm going to write to my MEPs. Right, strange thing to do, bizarre thing to do, but I did it. And the only response I got was from a Liberal Democrat MEP, who was a woman called Fiona Hall at the time. And she went, I'm going to come out and see. And she just went, have you tried knocking on the door? I went, no, I haven't actually. So we knocked on the first door, and woman born in Middlesbrough, single mum, came to the door and said, look at this house, it's disgusting. And you know what they're doing? They're just giving these houses away to immigrants, and it's absolutely ridiculous. Local people used to live here, and blah, blah. And you're like, right, okay. Genuine concerns. Knocked on the next door, and it was a guy from the Sudan, who was an asylum seeker who'd fled a conflict, and he came to London, and they gave him a one-way ticket, 200 miles north, and he said, "Yeah, look, if I remember correctly, he either used to be a doctor or a practitioner or something." He said, "Look, I don't want you to complain. I don't want you to complain to the housing association, because there's a roof over my head, and although it's leaking, I'm happy." And I was just like, these two people have the same problems. Their problem is the landlord and the lack of housing standards. And for the first time ever, a politician had gone, oh, hang on, what are you asking me for? Knock on the door and understand the issue yourself. And that's when I thought, you know what, if this is the only people that are taking interest in this issue, then I'm going to join them and I'm going to try and make a difference. It's easy. Look, when we've got the two parties constantly going at each other in a marginal like that, that is an argument that will always come back to people. It's like, you look, the chances are the Conservatives are going to win an election, so you better have a Conservative MP, otherwise you're not getting that school. And that, I mean, that's blackmail. And I think that it does not help this political discourse problem that we have, right? That if a politician is willing to say that, I mean, I understand to an element of what they're trying to do there. They're trying to say, look, I will have the ear of the Prime Minister. No, they won't. I don't know if you've ever been down to Westminster, but unless the Conservative Party are so devoid of talent that they're going to let a first-term MP have a position as Secretary of State, then it's just not going to happen. They're going to be the same struggle as always in trying to fight for your area. But it's not about how effective an MP is at securing funding that is desperately needed or investment that is desperately needed. It is how an MP leads the community to fight for the investment that is needed. And that can happen regardless of the colour of the rosette that you wear, if I'm really honest. If someone is dedicated in grassroots approach to politics and makes the case to a department, not just to other politicians, then they'll do all right. There are examples of politicians up and down the country that have delivered an immense amount for their constituencies, and they haven't been a member of the party that has been in government. So I think that's a little bit of a cheap shot.
What is your stance on Brexit?
So the Liberal Democrat stance and my stance has always been pretty clear, probably the clearest of any of the political parties. We want to stop Brexit. We think it's a bad idea. From the moment that the referendum result was announced, we took the position that it was wrong. And, I don't think it's undemocratic to say that we don't believe that was the right decision. I think that to a certain extent, people didn't really understand what the last 3 years would entail. We have a better idea now, and I think that people have changed their mind. And one of the principles of democracy is giving the people the opportunity to change their mind. Because if they don't, then we'd have been left with the same government that was first elected back in the 1700s. I think that our position on Brexit has been really clear. We need to ensure that we stop Brexit, that we use the money that would have been spent on exiting the EU and investing in the communities that desperately need investment. The issue is really complex, but there are ongoing talks around phoenixing the club. I think that Gig Lane is an asset that would bring value to the council, so I do think it is strategically worth purchase. Whether, of course, the club or a club ends up back there, I think we'd all want to see that happening eventually. But we need to understand exactly the evolutionary period between getting there, because it is a very costly site to maintain. There are a number of options on the table at the minute, but we all, I would, if I was the council, strategically purpose that site. One thing we don't want to happen is it to fall into the wrong hands and it become a point of development that no one wants for that area. But there is a bigger issue on just the total lack of support for grassroots football and the impact that has on the community. It's gutted it, absolutely gutted it. And, when you have just down the road clubs spending £100 million on footballers, and then Bury is allowed to fall by the wayside for various reasons, and none of them the responsibility of the fan base and the town. I think that's really sad, and that's just an example of the society that we live in. So actually, I made this point at the hustings. What's happened, particularly in Radcliffe, where you have a monopoly, like one company owns the vast majority of it, is now becoming a problem because economic regeneration in the area has been hampered by it, and they've been allowed to get to that point. I think that and I would support this in Parliament in giving local authorities the ability to do this, strategic compulsory purchase of particularly the marketplace, in order for the community, and transfer it to a community asset. So the community will decide the future of it, whether that be small businesses, whether it be a Christmas market, which I know is very popular, but also a regular market. I think it's really important to give the people the ability to decide the economic future of it. So in answer to your question, I think that there is much more to be done there, and at the minute, they don't have I think local residents do not have the ability to decide the future of that site, which I think is the problem. And I think that's why there is a lot of distrust and anger towards the council on that matter. But actually, another point is you've had the infrastructure, the civic centre, swimming pool, etc., gutted from the town and not replaced, and so there's no centre to really, there's no community civic place, there's no facilities in order to address some of the big public health issues that the area faces. So the council need to do a hell of a lot more there, and it should be doing a hell of a lot more, and they promised replacement years ago and they've never delivered, so I can see why people are angry. So taking the council investment issue separately to sort of like the wider investment question, there is no excuse for the council to have removed civic centre leisure facilities and not replaced them. I said at the hustings last night that a replacement civic centre town hall would not necessarily do the same functions that a town hall would do previously, but it is important to have that civic space. And that is a failure of the council not to highlight just the impact that the lack of facilities there has. We discussed slightly the public health issue in the area, but the fact that it's not a leisure facility, a council leisure facility with all the benefits that certain groups in society would get, discounted rates, etc., has in being within walking distance of the town, is a massive problem, and it is perpetuating the issue that the area has. In terms of the wider investment question, so in terms of like office investment, actually, there's been a swathe of office setups, whether it be solicitors or accountants, etc. So it's got an interesting sort of difference in where the investment is in the town. But what needs to happen, of course, is that we need to address stuff like the daytime and nighttime economy mix. We need to look at the burden that's put on businesses, not from a national legislative position, taking that burden away from tenants and onto commercial landlords, and whatever possible help that we can give businesses to get past the 2-year mark. Because once you've been in business for 2 years, you can restructure that debt, that initial setup debt, in creating a private enterprise to make it a lot more affordable, so that you can look at where you can invest for profitability. So it's frustrating for people because I think they see some element of private investment that's not necessarily what they want. They don't think it's the provision that the town needs. But the reason that it's not the provision that the town needs is because we have this perverse system that almost makes it hard for independent businesses to set up that are public facing and deliver the goods and services that people need. I think it's about the quality of our debate. Like the national debate has just gone into the gutter. Just scroll through Facebook. You don't need any facts, any figures, any references. You don't need to substantiate your argument anymore. You just need to say it. Politics has become about emotion. You know, one of the deciding factors of this election in Bury will be what happens down in London. And I think that is crazy. We've lost that local connection. So what's the point in having a local MP if the only thing we ever care about is how someone eats a sandwich? I think that really sells us short. Honestly, if I thought for a second that politics will be like this forever, I wouldn't be involved in it. It is a crisis. It's a genuine national crisis. Facebook and Twitter and all these bizarre vacuums that people put ourselves in now is part of the problem. But political parties should be, and political leaders should be, fighting against that. Why aren't, look at the quality of the debates we've had so far. We've put people in rooms full of supporters from one party and given them a hard time. People think politicians are fair game. So what politicians do in that circumstance is go back to what they know. They talk to one group of people, and it's their own supporters that are naturally going to be supportive of them. So they don't need to talk about the issues. They don't need to win the issues on fact. They just need to say what they think the people in their respective camp want them to say. And, we're all not just worse off for it. Physically, mentally, everything else, we are paying the price for this. And unless there is some sort of realization that's dawning that politicians are there to be respected and fight your corner and, roll your sleeves up and pick up a shovel, then we're going to lose what has been the most respected political system in the world since it was first born. And it is sad to see it happening, but one thing that I hope to do, and I hope to think that any colleagues that I have on Manchester City Council, but also colleagues and candidates standing in Bury South, will at least respect that I'm going to play the ball and not the man or woman or whatever gender that you identify as. And I think that if we can get that basic rule back, then our politics will be better for it. But it'll only happen if we, and political parties and Liberal Democrats included, select and elect people with that principle. I think we've lost that. You know what? I was pissed off too. I felt let down. I felt angry. But the stuff that I've spoken about today in terms of what politicians have done, I'm not trying to suggest for any moment that the Liberal Democrats are innocent of this. I think the tuition fees point, and I'm not going to get into the intricacies of the policy and et cetera, because that debate has already been lost. I think that it was an enormous trust issue. Because we have to work harder in some areas to get elected, people trusted us because we'd worked so hard for so many years in the constituencies up and down the country, as you've said. And for the first time ever, we let people down, and people felt hurt, and they were right to. And I remember actually when the coalition agreement first came out, I read it and I noticed that tuition fees wasn't on there. And I thought to myself, you know what, this is a mistake. There's maybe an element of naivety, I'm not sure, but this is going to be a trust issue. And I think that maybe there's an element of the party didn't really understand that is the reason that people voted for it. That was, especially in terms of the young vote, something that really stuck in their head as a policy, as a flagship policy. So yeah, it did question our trust, absolutely, and it has been, and I can vouch for it. It's been so hard to win that trust back from people. And I think it's important now more than ever that we don't get back into that situation. It was existential for us. And I never thought that what is the party of liberalism and centre ground politics and liberal movement would reach a day where it was struggling to have parliamentary representation. And that's what happened because of that loss of trust. So I think that we've certainly learned from the mistake, and it was a mistake. And I hope that we wouldn't make the same mistake again. But as we've said, trust in politics starts at the grassroots, and I think that's what we've done. We've worked at council seats. We've got back in places that we were wiped out. We've rebuilt that trust door by door, issue by issue. And I hope that the electorate, people up and down the country, and especially in Bury South, will understand that this election has to be about the issues and the biggest issues that we face right now. And we don't get stuck in the issues of the past. And absolutely, and I'd hope that everyone would have this conversation with me, actually, because I think it took me a while to square that round peg in what I think is right when you go to the electorate with a pledge and then what happens afterwards. And you can make the argument about the policy, you can make the argument about parliamentary arithmetic, but when you make a promise to someone and you do not keep it, it's not about the promise, it's about the principles of why you were there in the first place and the relationship that you have with your constituents. I personally, and if elected, this is exactly what I do, is I would not vote to go into coalition with either of the Labour Party or the Conservative Party. And I do that again, learning from the discussion that we had about tuition fees, is that we've gone to the electorate this time with a clear Brexit stance. And I would not want to do anything that compromised that stance. And I don't think the Conservative Party fits with our stance on Brexit in its entirety. And I think that the Labour Party, well, I mean, I haven't seen BBC News lately, so I don't know what their stance is on Brexit at the minute. But I know for a fact that we couldn't possibly support a Prime Minister that is Jeremy Corbyn at the minute. So I'd be absolutely happy to discuss a confidence and supply relationship where we'd vote on certain policies and try and get enacted as much as we can that we went to the electorate and promised. But in terms of formal coalition, I would not support. It's going to be an interesting one. So I'll start with a non-Lib Dem politician, Mo Mowlam, who represented Redcar, or Redcar, if I was going to be colloquial. It's amazing, isn't it, that that woman had DUP, Sinn Féin, Republican and Ulster Unionists in a room. And I love this story because I love the idea that she was stage 3 cancer at the time, I can't quite remember. And she's got the middle stage of the Good Friday Agreement. And you've got senior politicians on both sides hammering at each other across the room. And she just takes her wig off, puts it in the centre of the table, and everyone goes silent. And she goes, look, we don't have enough time. Can we please sit down? I think that force of character is inspiring. I wouldn't necessarily agree with all the politics, but that force of nature, the willingness to go right and swear as much as you like, because that's what she was. That was she again. She played it straight. That's who she was. I think everyone can take something from Mo Mowlam. And then obviously being an MP so local to where I grew up, she was a bit of a local celebrity. Whenever you went to the seaside, everyone, you saw her office, very, very prominent, constituency-based MP. So I took a lot from her and her story, and I think that she's actually probably one of the most underrated Labour politicians of New Labour. I always found her to be inspiring, if I'm honest. I'm sure some Labour opponents of mine over the years will be, spitting their drink out at that, but it's true. I was inspired by her. The second person, who is no longer an MP, no longer with us, just like Mo Mowlam, is Paddy Ashdown. Paddy, not just because he was ginger, but he was... I first met him when I joined the party when I was like 15, and he had the time of day for you. He wanted to hear about what you were saying. He challenged you. He didn't just inspire people for what he did on Hong Kong, which, I mean, look at the situation there now, and Bosnia and education and so many areas that he actually made an immense amount of progress in, even though he was a leader of a party that was, at the time, it was 0% in the polls. I think that is an incredible achievement. And he led it to almost a Lib Lab pact, if you remember. So that's an element of leadership that is incredible. But he spoke with such gravitas, and he with such warmth that I think that if I had an ounce of what that guy had, and I always say got because I'm still not used to it, then I'd be a happy person. But he came to Manchester shortly before he got the cancer diagnosis, and he was speaking to me about how amazing Bosnia was and everything that he'd done and blah blah blah. And he never really spoke about his involvement in that region and what happened there. But I was in Bosnia 4 weeks ago, just Halloween. I went to visit because I always wanted to, and when he passed away, I thought, right, you know what, I'm going to go and see it, because he did inspire me a lot. And I read a story about how he just outside Srebrenica, when when bodies were first being identified, and there were no men left in the town, and the mothers and the wives of those that had been killed had to bury their own sons or fathers or grandfathers. And he was High Commissioner of Bosnia, and he was visiting the area, and he just took his suit jacket off, rolled up his sleeve, and got a shovel, started digging. And that, I think, is a quality of leadership that we all should aspire to have, that sometimes, no matter what your position in life, sometimes it's about rolling your sleeve up and working for the people that you're there to work for. £10 million doesn't get you a lot now. It certainly wouldn't get you a leisure facility. You'd need more than £10 million for that. I think that I would start the investment that's desperately needed, not just in Radcliffe Town Centre and the leisure facility and what can happen to a certain degree with the school, but I'll also look at the really basic infrastructure problems that we've got with the road network. Bury Council area probably needs about £100 million worth of investment in its highways, full stop. So £10 million will do very little. But we need to make sure that, yes, we have the facilities and the investment that people need in order to, because every pound spent on an investment should garner more pounds spent in the private sector. But where local government and Parliament is responsible is to ensure that the basic infrastructure is there so that investors see it as a positive place to spend their money. So that's where I spend my 10 million. I'd make sure that the area has that brand and is reliable and has the infrastructure in place.